Welcome to the ThePPod.
Right then, welcome back to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. I'm also pleased today to welcome back friend of the ThePPod, Jackie Webb, who joined us a little while back to share her wisdom about her area of expertise, motivational interviewing. So Jackie, welcome back. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Thank you. Well, this is the second part of a series recording with Jackie on motivational interviewing. So if you've not heard part one, I recommend you go back and listen to this one first before then diving back into today's episode. So Jackie, last time we met, we sort of posed the question about really sort of what is motivational interviewing, and we talked about things like the principles of motivational interviewing, recognising the client as the expert in a relationship, and we talked about ambivalence as well, didn't we? About that being a normal part of change, and that not meaning that the client is apathetic towards change, but really that is part of that sort of normal change process and sort of recognising the benefits of change whilst also sort of feeling the benefits of staying in the status quo. And we talked importantly about the importance of listening and communication skills to identify and encourage change talk, and to support the client really in identifying change themselves and having that motivation for change.
Lovely summary.
Hopefully, yes. So welcome back. So today we're sort of we're posing an equally sort of simple question with probably an equally complicated answer to it, which is motivational interviewing. Why is it so hard when it seems so obvious?
Yeah, it's something I've thought about a lot, actually. And there's been quite a lot of research into how people learn motivational interviewing, because quite often during training, people have a kind of a real recognition of what we're talking about when we're teaching motivational interviewing. But when often people come to try it, they realise that it feels harder to do than it looks. So they can identify when other people are doing it. They can kind of notice it when other people are doing it or when they're not. But then when they come to do it themselves, it feels a lot harder. So that's something that we were going to talk about today.
Yeah, and it's one of those interesting things. And like you say, it does seem common sense. Yeah, I think. And I know from when I've done the training with you before, there is that sort of light bulb moment, and you think, well, of course that makes sense. But like you say, in practice, it is quite hard,
Much
isn't
harder.
it? So why is that?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a lot, and one of the things, first of all, to say is that often people think when they notice this thing that we talk about as the righting reflex or the fixing reflex, that there's something wrong with them, that that they must, have a really strong fixing reflex, that they're different to other people. But that isn't the case. In fact, most people, if not all people, have that desire to fix. And that comes from a really good place. It's a desire to help somebody. And that is a natural part of what humans do, in fact. So when you hear a problem, it's your natural response to think, how could I solve this? What could I do? So inevitably, we start hearing a problem. Somebody starts, whether that's a friend or somebody at work or whatever situation you're in, and we start thinking of ideas that would help them to get better, to resolve it. And sometimes that works occasionally. And I think that's what keeps people going with the righting reflex, that occasionally you do hit on the thing that's going to help that person and they do it. But that doesn't happen that often, actually. If we think about our own conversations with people and we start making suggestions, very often what we get is the equivalent of a yes, but. That sounds like a good idea, Steve. Yeah. No, I've thought of that actually. And, but I don't think it'll work for me. Or, if I really like you and I don't want you to be annoyed with me for rejecting your idea, I might just nod and say, oh, yeah. I might do that. But the next time you see me, I haven't done it. And then we might try and start problem solving the reasons the person gives for not having done it. Oh, I didn't have the time. I didn't get around to it. I tried it once and then I forgot about it. all those kind of things, we start saying, well, how could you make more time or whether. So we get ourselves into this dynamic of trying to then persuade the person or resolve any issues they've got around why they couldn't do it. Rather than what we're trying to do in MI is let that go completely. Let that idea that we have to have the solutions, the ideas, let that go completely. And that's another thing that we'll come on to in a minute about that in itself is really difficult because we don't feel we're doing enough if we don't offer suggestions or solutions.
Do you think that some people are more naturally inclined to be able to use MI than others, kind of less inclined to do that problem solving or not?
I don't think so. My experience is that, because sometimes on training, people will say, this is what men do.
I was wondering, because I remember many years ago reading Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and that sort of the Martians there sort of wanting to fix, to get in, be those problem solvers, whereas the Venusians very much more about sort of emotions, tuning in, listening. Mm-hmm. And is that something you see?
To be honest with you, no. I think, seriously, I see it equally and in men and women, really, and it often the starting point to this is noticing that you're doing it. Because very often, if you don't think that you've got a strong writing reflex, you won't notice that you're doing it because it can be very subtle. It can be not even maybe giving the solution early on in the conversation, but going straight to, well, what could you do? You've got ahead of that person. You're rushing them to resolution. So even if you might not be offering the solution, it's the same kind of dynamic. We're getting ahead of that person. We're not giving them the space to really think about, what's going on here and why might I want to make the change, rather than going straight to how can I fix it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I think there is, for me, I'm just thinking about my sort of working with families over the years, and I think for me, like you say, there's partly that sort of natural wanting to, and sort of naturally, instinctively kind of saying, okay, here's a problem. Oh, I've got a solution for it. How about this? I'm just sort of reflecting a bit as well, thinking about practice, and actually there have been additional pressures on people, on professionals, to do that as well. Do you see that?
Yeah. From there are pressures, all sorts of pressures. So you'll get pressures maybe from managers if they're not working in the MI kind of way. Potentially, they might put pressures on staff to go out there and do something with somebody before the person is ready for the doing. But also, you might have internal pressures, and I think this feeds into the ego bit that we're going to come on to, is almost, I'm not being helpful. So we'll get that internal driver. It's like, I've got to be able to show that I know things to be helpful.
Yeah, and demonstrate my professional expertise. Yeah.
Exactly, and sometimes clients, if I can use that word, or whatever word service users, whatever word you'd like to use, sometimes we kind of feel like we're being pushed into expert by people. They might say, they might have been waiting to see this professional for weeks, months in some cases, and they're waiting for the solution. So the professional might be almost seduced into offering suggestions. Now, if the person does those suggestions, like I said earlier, it's not a problem. You don't need motivational interviewing. But frequently you get the same dynamic because in actual fact, people, they might want some expertise, but they also want to be autonomous in deciding what they do in their family or their life to make change. So it's holding on to that expertise very lightly in MI.
Yeah, it's kind of it's holding on to different expertise, I think, isn't it? There's a lot of expertise needed in MI, but it's different to how that expertise is normally perceived, I think.
Absolutely.
And I know, and just you were talking then, I can certainly think of times where, I felt real pressures to, get those solutions. We've got a set amount of time to work with this family. We've got to achieve X, Y, and Z. got to sort of tick these boxes to make sure we can kind of come out the other side with this, all singing, all dancing, all resolved. So that initial pressure, and then like you say, pressure on myself, thinking, do you know what? I've got to be there now. I've got to sort of demonstrate that I know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
And then I was thinking as well about families that I've gone into, and I've had times where I've literally walked into somebody's lounge and they've gone, "Oh, brilliant, you're here now.
Thank God you're here.
Thank God you're here. You're going to sort things out, aren't you?" And like you say, sort of instantly having to go, right, yeah, okay, let's talk about it. And in fact, I do remember some families I've literally met them for about 30 seconds walking into their house, and they've said, brilliant, what do we need, what do we need to do? What do I need to do? And I've had to stop and say, actually, at this point in time, I have no idea, because I've literally just met you and we need to kind of talk and understand first.
Absolutely. And that's very brave to actually say that and actually acknowledge, I might have some suggestions for you, but actually I'd be really keen to hear about what you've been thinking and what you've been trying first. And very often when we do let go of that, having to immediately solve the problem, we find that the person does respond well to that approach, and they forget that they wanted you to fix it for them as you sit in that place where they can, because usually they are the experts on their family, their children, their own lives, and they've got resources already. But there's something about almost holding back in MI, holding back. But you're right, you are doing something that is undervalued, I think, in helping professions, which is really good listening. Really good listening.
I'm thinking as well that within our culture, within many cultures, there is a kind of the unspoken rules about communication where I will talk for so long and then I'm going to stop, because if I carry on, it's kind of impolite. So I'm going to stop and then you talk, and then we'll have this sort of tennis back and forth.
Yeah.
Whereas actually quite often, I think when I've used MI, actually it's just allowing the person that sort of permission to say, I'm here, I'm listening, just carry on. And so you've still got that back and forth, but you're not having to fill the space with those solutions.
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. So it's listening in a different way to what we might do in a normal conversation. You or I were talking before we started recording. We're doing exactly what you described. But when you kind of listen in an MI way, it's nothing about me. So I'm not then waiting long enough to just give you, yes, that happened to me and here's what happened to me, which is what we tend to do in normal conversation. And, oh, yes, that's made me think of a story myself, or oh, here's an idea from me. What, interestingly, in one training, it reminds, so I always do a demo at the start of a training, and I do a non-MI example followed by an MI example. And someone once said to me, so in the non-MI example, we learned a lot about you, Jackie. In the MI example, we learned nothing about you. We learned everything about the client. And that's it. We should be really listening to facilitate the person hearing themselves talk aloud about this issue and what they may or may not want to do about it. So we're facilitating the person hearing themselves talk. So if you like, we're inviting them to hold a mirror up to themselves.
And I think for me, sometimes that's where those simple reflections come in early on, is literally just almost saying to somebody, I'm listening, I'm giving you...
Please carry on.
I'm giving you permission to carry on.
Yeah.
And just that very simple reflection. And I think for me, quite often when I've spoken to people at MI, it's a real sort of light bulb moment of not having to have all the solutions, not feeling like I have to have all the solutions, and listening being a big part of it, particularly where we're in a situation where we feel that we are there to talk.
And you mentioned that feeling like when you're reflecting on your own practice there, Steve, huge pressure or burden on you to resolve it for somebody.
And you mentioned letting go of the ego a moment ago. Is that sort of what you're referring to there?
Yeah, in a sense, I think that does tie in, because I think sometimes we think we have to be really clever when we're doing MI, actually. So with any approach, it's like we've got to almost show our worth to the person by asking an amazing question or whatever. So or gathering information. Often we think we're listening to gather information. But again, that for me is ego. I'm not using ego in a negative sense here. It's us thinking about ourselves in that, rather than thinking, actually, it's not me gathering information for long enough to fix it. Because often when we're gathering information, we're implying to the person, if I just ask you enough questions, I'll have the answer for you. And very often the worker's sitting there thinking, I do not know what to do. So it's kind of letting go of that. And like you said, that lovely way you described, sort of saying to that service user, I at this stage, I really do not have the answers, but I'd like to listen to you and hear what you've got. And letting go of that pressure, that internal pressure or external pressures to fix. And that can be quite hard, but it can also be very liberating when you do it.
I think that's a big part of it for me is that you use the word liberation. And I think it is quite a liberation. Again, when I've spoken to people about this kind of broadly, it is a real revelation of like, actually, I don't have to be there to have all those solutions. It's okay. And I know as well, I've been in situations at times where, just taking this back up for a moment here, where you've made a suggestion and somebody says, oh no, I've tried that, it didn't work. And I know for myself, my instant reaction to that has been, go through my Rolodex in my head of what else have I tried before? Oh, okay. Or how about there's this? This is really good. Yeah, this kind of works for a lot of people. And you get the response saying, oh, no, I
don't think so.
No,
not
I don't think
me.
so. Not for me. So instantly, Rolodex goes again. What else? Oh, hang on, I'll pull this one out. Here we go. What about this? No, that's... And eventually...
And then you run out of ideas.
Absolutely. You run out of ideas, you run out of your Rolodex, but also you run out of confidence in your own expertise because you've tried everything and you don't know where to go with it next.
And sometimes in that scenario, unfortunately, we start blaming the client. They're being resistant to all my great offers here. And that can set us up into quite a difficult dynamic.
Yeah.
We're putting the blame with the client for not accepting or not trying hard enough for our ideas.
And I wonder if there's, again, just sort of going back to the ego side of it, where maybe then it's a kind of potentially a feeling of a rejection of us as a professional and all our professionality and all our ideas and everything else we've got.
Absolutely. And again, that doesn't tend to lead to a great helping collaboration. In fact, we're not collaborating. And there's an analogy we use in MI with dancing, not wrestling. And effectively, even if it sounds quite nice, you with your Rolodex offering me solutions and I'm rejecting them, we're actually wrestling. So you're presenting me with a solution, I'm rejecting it. And then you're trying to persuade me that actually this would work if only you tried it again or slightly in a different way or whatever. We're wrestling. So we want to stop that. And so in MI, because we've always got a consultant in the conversation, which is our client, if we're paying attention to their responses, I will absolutely allow people to have one yes, but it's noticing that, what did I do there? I've probably gone into prematurely offering solutions before the person's ready for it, or they might never want your solutions. But it's noticing, because the yes, but doesn't always sound obvious. It can be quite, hidden. Might say, I know where you're coming from there, Steve. That sounds quite helpful. Yeah, I thought about that actually. And, but I don't think I'd do it, so it can be quite hidden and it can sound quite nice. But so it's really tuning in to the client's response. So and that's something we're doing a lot in MI. And in that situation, I might say, do you know what? I'm really sorry. I got ahead of you there. You weren't interested in my ideas. What about you? What are you thinking?
And that, yeah. And again, it's flipping around, isn't it? It's not that but is, okay, you're being resistant.
No.
I need to kind of push a bit more. I need to try a different angle. I need to try this. It's actually flipping that around and that self-awareness to say, actually, I've picked up on that actually, I need to do something different here.
Yes, it's all about that. In MI, we are not blaming the client for being resistant to our ideas. We're thinking, what might I do next that will reduce that resistance? Because if somebody is telling us why they can't do something, if we go back to our first episode, you're encouraging them to verbalize the reasons why they can't do something. And that is anathema in MI, because all the time they're telling you why they can't do something, the likelihood of change is going down.
And when we've sort of got this dynamic potentially, I'm just, what's coming into my head is around sort of the topic of disguised compliance, which I think I'm hearing less of these days. But I think quite often it would be that kind of instant response of, this is the dynamic, there's disguised compliance going on, particularly like you were saying earlier, the example of somebody saying, oh, that sounds really good, yeah, I'll give that a try.
Yeah.
And then they don't.
Yeah.
I think you can see potentially, again, that sort of putting on the client saying, oh, there's disguised compliance there. They said they were going to do it.
Yes.
We had a really good conversation about it. They recognised everything that I was saying.
Yeah.
But they didn't do it.
No.
So is that disguised compliance? And I think we're seeing a shift in that.
Yeah, I think people are sort of looking at that in a less simplistic way now, I think. But you're absolutely right. That has been a bit of a journey to recognise our part in that and not put the blame with the client, because, you know, especially with social workers, but lots of different professionals, there's a power imbalance, isn't there? So if you were worried that there could be consequences if you don't agree to make an appointment with a drugs worker, you're probably going to agree to it. But it kind of underestimates potentially the ambivalence the person has about getting help for their drug problem. It's probably not that they didn't have time or forgot the number or whatever. You know, it's then thinking, actually, have I pushed that person too quickly to doing something that they weren't ready for? And not let me wait for them to be ready. What could I do in my conversation next time that might make it more likely that they might be prepared to think about that?
Somebody said something interesting to me a little while back, and they said, you know, if we think about sort of disguised compliance, how many people have gone to their GP and their GP said, so, you know, how much alcohol do you drink? And you say, oh, maybe a glass of wine a week, if that, maybe. And how many people, actually, that's an honest response. And I'm not saying, you know, everyone drinks loads of alcohol, but actually there is almost that sort of innate, we need to say the right thing. Because we're aware of, you know, we shouldn't drink too much alcohol.
Yep.
And so we kind of have this position of, oh, well, hardly anything these days. If I'm lucky, maybe a glass of wine every couple of weeks or so, special occasions. But that's not actually honest quite often.
Yeah. And I think it's remembering we are our clients. You know, there's no difference between us and the people we work with in terms of how you respond. And certainly, you know, you in MI, you want to make it more likely that the person can be open and honest with you, which goes back to our principles of MI. Is like so important that the person feels like they can be honest with you about their situation. So all of those things tie together to make this disguised compliance an absolutely important issue, because, well, it's a misnomer anyway, isn't it? Because it's disguised non-compliance. You know.
Yeah, and I think Donald Forrester sums up really nicely, you know, in terms of actually if we class something disguised compliance, it puts the onus on the client as the problem.
Absolutely.
Rather than encouraging it as a two-way relationship.
Yeah. Always in MI, we're thinking, what can I do? That doesn't mean to say that some people won't try to pull the wool over our eyes, because you sort of have to have that balance, don't you, in MI? Good supervision is so essential to kind of, for social workers in particular, but other professionals, to think about, well, when is it that somebody, you know, there's a true safeguarding issue here that needs to be addressed. At the same time, recognising our part in any dynamic where someone has got to the point where they feel they've got to tell you what you want to hear. That would suggest to me that the engagement isn't good enough.
Yeah, and Yeah, I think what you said earlier is when we're talking about the topic of disguised compliance is often an oversimplification. I think you sort of hit the nail on the head for me. Is like you say, actually there are instances where we know that people are not honest with agencies because they are trying to hide a circumstance, hide abuse towards children.
Yeah.
But like you say, there's often an oversimplification of these other aspects where we are putting the responsibility on the client.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Jackie. So I'm just wondering, as we're talking, are there any other kind of common pitfalls that people fall into with MI?
Yeah, one that's very much related to problem solving, and we've touched on it, I think, a little bit, is us getting ahead of the person's readiness for the doing, how you go about something. So an example of that might be you start talking to me about a problem. I'm not offering you a suggestion, but I'm straight away saying, what could you do about that?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm missing out the bit that really is vital in motivational interviewing, which is the talking about why you might make the change and going straight to how. And then very often what we tend to get is a I don't know or a shrug of the shoulders. And then, it's so tempting then, isn't it, to make suggestions? So the two feed off each other. So if we've done that, and again, it's such a kind of forgiving approach, and we hear that, well, I don't know, it kind of, or shrug of the shoulders, or I thought you were going to tell me what to do. It's like, oh, hang on, I've rushed ahead a little bit here. Let's just go back. Let's just park that. We don't need to. I often say that, actually. We don't even need to think about how you're going to do it for now. We might not even get there today. But, if you did decide that you wanted to cut down your drinking, what might the benefits be?
So we're kind of referring to the change cycle here. And if people aren't familiar with the change cycle, so what does that encompass?
So stages of change is not motivational interviewing, but it does help us to think about it. They're kind of referred to as cousins. So Bill Miller's first essay on motivational interviewing did refer to the trans-theoretical model, also known as the stages of change. And if people are not familiar with that, then you can easily find that if you look it up online. But basically, there are several stages that people tend to go through on their journey to making change. And the early stages, so you get pre-contemplation, where somebody is not at all thinking about making the change. So the research into this was around smoking. So if the person was smoking, they're not thinking about change, they're happy doing it. So the next stage is contemplation. So that's where the person is still doing the behavior, whatever that might be, smoking, but they're less comfortable than they were early on in the process. So they might be a little bit worried about their health. Maybe they've got children now and they're worried about the impact on their children of seeing them smoke. So they're still smoking. They're just not so comfortable with it anymore. So that really is that's where you're trying to get people to really in MI, and we can engage people at pre-contemplation to try and kind of make them a little bit more ambivalent about the change by our approach, so that then we can start thinking about those two arguments. Because likely as not, when somebody is contemplating change, even if they haven't expressed it to anybody, they thought about both sides. They thought about reasons to carry on smoking. I like it. It's my only vice. Lots of my friends do it. It's a nice social thing to do. I enjoy the break it gives me. Lots of reasons to do it. There'll be another team inside them if they're in contemplation, which is, I don't want to be doing this when I'm older. I want to get on top of it before my kids are old enough to start copying me. I am a bit worried about that cough I get sometimes in the winter, and I wonder if that's related to smoking. And boy, is it expensive now. So you're going to get both sides. And that's where if we respond in one way to the person, and I start saying, trying to make the arguments for change, that's when the person is going to defend the status quo. So I don't want that to happen. But what can happen is we go straight to action, which is a later stage in the process, which is where you're asking the person to come up with a plan of how they're going to do it before they've actually resolved their ambivalence that they actually do want to make the change. So that's the bit where we're really rolling up our sleeves in MI and we are listening out for change talk, and we're softening or reducing what we call sustained talk, which is reasons not to change.
And again, you can see the pressures, can't you? If we're looking at that pre-contemplation stage, if we're going in saying, okay, I'm here to do a job, this is what we've got to resolve, come on, let's get on with it.
Yeah.
Then you get that resistance.
Yes.
But also you can see if somebody's at that contemplation stage and we go in and start having that conversation, they're saying, yeah, I really should stop this. That urge then to go, great, okay, let's do this.
Rush ahead.
Let's sort this.
Yeah.
So what are the sort of consequences if you're rushing ahead then? You sort of mentioned a bit earlier.
Yeah, well, what do you think you'd hear? If I was working with you and I heard a little bit of motivation for change, is that I know I ought to do something about my smoking. And I go, great, have you heard of the Smoke Stop scheme in Somerset? It's really good now. They've made loads of changes. I can give you the number for that. So they're really good.
I know. I would probably be sitting there thinking, it's not for me. I know it's I'm sure they're great. I'm sure they're lovely people, but actually that's not for me. It's not the way I want to do it.
No. And then if I start saying to you, no, but really give it a go, just phone them, see what you think. I mean, what's all you have to do? What's to lose if you just give them a ring?
And I'd probably be responding saying, well, yeah, no, I haven't got anything to lose. You know, that's fine. I suppose there's no harm in giving it a go, giving it a ring.
But in your mind?
I wouldn't give them a ring.
No. So you're kind of, you feel a bit of pressure from me and you think to stop me giving you that pressure, you'll agree with it. But in your mind, there's no way you're going to do that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So next time I see you and I say, so how did you get on ringing the Smoke Stop service?
Oh, yeah, I gave them a ring, but they talked to me for a little while, but it wasn't really for me.
Okay. Even if you did do it, which I'm doubting here, so then I kind of, where do I go next? Now, if I'm paying attention to the dynamic between you and I'm thinking, Steve's he's clearly resistant and and I'm blaming you for not doing it. And now I'm going to try and persuade you or make another suggestion. What instead I want to do is think, obviously I've rushed ahead there and I've gone straight to what we call planning in MI, but in the stages of change we might call action. And I'm at action because I want you to be at action. You're nowhere there. So there's no point, we would say, in responding to somebody, getting ahead of them, because what you're likely to get back is more pushback, more reasons not to. And that is actually counterproductive to the process of change because the person has convinced themselves they don't want to again. So although when we're under pressure, whether that's internal pressure or external forces putting us under pressure, it's always thinking, where is the person? How ready are they for a plan, how to do it? Or would it be better for me to spend, 10 minutes, 15 minutes talking about their motivation for why they might want to? So in MI, we're giving much more attention to that. So I might say, yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. You're not actually ready for a plan. But I just wonder, would you mind telling me, I can hear that you quite like smoking actually, and, you're probably not ready to give it up quite yet. But I can hear also there's just a little bit of worry in there about some of the aspects of it. Do you mind telling me a little bit about that?
And I think just picking up on the point you made earlier as well, I think, the other response I could have given you earlier would have probably have been, I've been meaning to, but you know what? It's been a really busy week. It's just been a bit crazy at the moment and we've had to do this and had to do that and had to do the other. And like you mentioned earlier, quite often then there's a risk we start problem solving those aspects.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that I see quite often in the work that I do, where maybe somebody had been working with a family for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And actually, when you sort of stop and reflect and look at it, think, actually, why are we doing this stuff over here? Because actually the intention of our involvement with this family is something completely different. And you go off on a complete tangent with something. And I think there's a real risk with that. Like, say, you sort of go down this sort of rabbit hole of fixing other
various
aspects,
problems,
which aren't really the issue in the first place.
No, we can easily get drawn into this week's issues as well, can't we? And we can lose focus about why we're working with a family. And as you say, often we are engaged with families for quite long periods of time. And I know that's not the case for everybody that might be listening. But sometimes people say, I haven't got time for this, am I? And then we kind of add up the number of hours of opportunity for conversations about change. And actually, there are lots of opportunities.
And like you said at the start, and I know you're very, very passionate about, is in terms of that sort of developing that culture around MI within organisations. And you mentioned before, and you mentioned this morning, but sort of that coming from the managerial level, coming from the top to begin with, to understand that. And I think you're right. Often there is that real pressure. Services are under pressure. There's waiting lists for agencies. So we need to get in there and we need to sort it.
Yes.
But actually, and sometimes seeing there's a risk, I think, of seeing MI of, well, it's too long-winded. It takes too long to do all of this stuff. And actually we need to get in there and fix. But actually,
not at all.
What we're looking at is in the long term, actually it's a much, much quicker, much more effective process than ending up 12 months, 18 months down the line working on something over here and not actually sort of getting to the nub of the issue.
Absolutely. And MI was designed to be a brief intervention. These are often quite short conversations about change. You can use it as a therapy, as a standalone therapy, absolutely. But often people who are going to be listening to this are maybe going to have corridor conversations with somebody or 5 or 10 minute conversations on a car journey. And it's designed to be a conversational style that uses active listening skills really, really carefully to think about this being a different sort of conversation about change that the person is used to. Often they're used to people fixing them and kind of have had enough of that. Somebody on one of the training courses I ran once, she was pregnant and she was experiencing morning sickness. And I talked about the writing reflex, and she's put her hand up really enthusiastically and said, if one more person tells me to eat ginger biscuits or wear travel bands, I swear I'm going to scream. Because, she'd thought of that numerous times. She'd tried it so many times. And of course, the people are trying to be helpful because they've had that experience and they want to be able to offer something. But very often what she wanted when she was saying she had morning sickness wasn't an answer, was it? What was it she wanted?
She wanted us to listen.
Yep. Yeah. She wanted to be understood and for someone to be able to empathise with her position.
So I think a really good sort of example of this to sort of demonstrate what we've just been talking about is I know a lovely clip that you use quite often, a video clip called "It's Not About the Nail."
Yeah.
So should we have a listen to that?
Yeah,
it's just
definitely.
There's all this pressure, and sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. All of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can...
So, what do you make of that, then?
Well, the dynamic, and obviously it's a visual gag, so it would be helpful if people would get more from it if they watched it. It's easily found on YouTube. So what's happening is the woman in the clip has a very prominent nail in the middle of her forehead. And her partner, we assume her partner, is sitting there listening to her initially talk about, she's got this achy feeling in her head, all her jumpers, sweaters are snagged, and all of this kind of thing. Now, the problem is staring him in the face. It's obvious to him what she needs to do to resolve the problem. So it seems the obvious thing for him to just tell her, okay, what you need to do is just pull the nail out of the head. But she doesn't. She doesn't like it. So we have to ask ourselves, why? Why is she not listening to him? Because it's obvious to everybody watching what the problem is here. And that really kind of is a lovely visual metaphor for what happens when we're talking to somebody about a problem and it seems obvious to us what they need to do about it. That kind of age-old kind of somebody says, I mentioned the person with the morning sickness. Oh, why don't you try eating ginger biscuits? Oh, for goodness sake, I've eaten my body weight in ginger biscuits and it's not working. Now they're just not ready for that solution, or they've tried it and it didn't work. And what we then get is that person being irritated. They might disengage from us. So clearly this person's not good at listening. But interestingly, in the clip, she knows that she wants to be listened to. And in the end, he agrees to that. And he starts listening. He starts empathizing. He says, that must be really hard. She says, yes, it is. She's so relieved that he's finally listening. Unfortunately, it's ruined because they go in for the kiss.
Oh, it's always about the kiss.
Always about the kiss.
But also with that, is he actually listening, or is he kind of like, okay,
well, he
fine.
looks like he is. I mean, but you're right. It's like he's still pretty irritated, which actually tells us something really important is we have to keep working at this. Because sometimes we're just holding on for long enough to say, yeah, but take the nail out. We have to genuinely sit in that position. And, it surprises me time after time how people really value being listened to. And very often, especially when we're going to talk about, the direction of the conversation, because we're not just listening, we're listening in a particular way in MI, which we're going to come onto in future episodes. But there's something about that process that gets out of the person's way. We're not offering suggestions. We're not trying to fix it. We're not getting ahead of them, and allows the person to actually process, I think I know what's going on here. And that's the bit we want, is the person to go, do you know what? As I'm talking to you, I think I know what the situation is here. And it's that realization that is what happens, tends to happen. And so many times I've been struck by that. I still sit there when I'm having MI conversation thinking, I don't know what's happening here, because it's going on in the person's head often. And frequently, then the person goes, I think I know what I need to do.
So so we sort of covered some of the issues there. Are there any other kind of common issues that come up, or if not, sort of, are there any sort of top tips that you would sort of want to give people about sort of avoiding some of those pitfalls?
Well, the first thing really is awareness. I think that's number one. And sometimes that's the first thing that people go away with from an MI training, even if it's, just a half-day training, is that awareness of the writing reflex or the fixing reflex that comes up in all of us, because it does in all of us. Second of all is that noticing if you're rushing ahead of the person. So it's tuning in to the other person and really being aware of the responses, because you don't have to be, slick at this at the start. It's noticing the response. So if the person is talking and they're giving you lots of reasons for change, you're doing something right. Keep doing it. If what you're getting is yes, but, and the person not doing something, maybe reflect upon that and think, what's happening there? What am I doing in that conversation? And what could I do instead?
Brilliant. Thank you. So and it's been fascinating to talk about this today. And like I say, I think I might rename our recordings together of Jackie, the asker of simple questions with complicated answers to it, because it, like you say, on the surface, actually, a lot of these things seem very common sense, very straightforward, but actually take a lot of thinking about and a lot of practice as well.
Absolutely. So, if you're at the start of your MI journey, is being kind to yourself and thinking that whilst it may look easy, it's a very complex thing that is happening, and everyone starts somewhere, and very often awareness is the starting point.
So, Jackie, I think unless there's anything else we want to sort of cover today, it's probably good to start looking sort of to the future a little bit if we can. And we talked before this recording today about possibly our next one together, where we're going to sort of be talking about that sort of how to identify and support change talk.
Yeah, because obviously listening, really good listening is fundamental to MI. We need to do that. But what we thought we would spend a bit of time talking about is what in particular we're listening out for in an MI conversation.
Brilliant. Let's come back and do that next time then if we can.
Lovely.
Jackie, thank you so much again for your time today. It's been great.
It's a pleasure.
And we'll speak to you again next time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. As discussed in today's episode with Jackie, the SSCP are now offering free Introduction to Motivational Interviewing training, the dates and details of which can be found on the SSCP training site. Jackie will also be joining us shortly for more episodes, where we'll be discussing some of the details of MI. So if today's episode has left you wanting more, don't worry, there is more on its way. As always, if you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episodes, please go to the SSCP website at somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk. If you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in future episodes, we'd love you to get in touch with us at ThePPod@somerset.gov.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank Jackie Webb, Motivational Interviewing Trainer, for taking part in today's podcast, and of course to you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the Training Manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership, and I look forward to you joining us again next time at ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.